Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dudes and dudettes, the sexy and the not so sexy, big children and little. Welcome to the information era, where everyone on the streets has a computer in their pocket, but nobody really knows shit.
Let's think this through.
Let's think this through.
Let's think this through. Let's think this through.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dudes and dudettes, the sexy, the not so sexy, big children and little. I am the novelist, author, poet, Lamont Anthony Wright, aka Graffiti Bleu. Let's get right to it. First, we're going to make an observation. Then we're going to ask a question. Then we will form a hypothesis that answers the question. And then we will make a prediction based on the hypothesis. We will do an experiment. I'm not a scientist, so these experiments will be me citing examples of social experiments that have already been conducted or social experiences that I myself can testify to. And then last but not least, we will analyze the results. Now, this is tongue-in-cheek because, again, I'm not a scientist, I'm an artist. So I'm taking a scientific method and approaching this scientific method artistically. So at the end of it, I'll quote the oracle from the Matrix on this. Ultimately, you can accept my wisdom, my artistic spin on these specific topics, or you can reject it. You can accept what I'm telling you, or you can reject it. Either one does actually not matter to me. What matters is that I get the space between your ears active. Nothing's quite as liberating as critical thinking. So let's get right to it. Let's make an observation first. It appears to me that the murder of black people is a marketing strategy. That's my observation. The mass murder of a specific culture, race, is a marketing strategy. Well, okay. Let's unpack that, and we'll unpack it by asking a question. Are we being programmed to normalize Black Death? My hypothesis is indeed we are. I'm not a scholar on the subject of race, but it seems to me that the only way for a minority to control a majority is through division, right? So everybody's always talking about the Illuminati and the Illuminati and the Illuminati. And even in my own experiences, every time I've worked my way up that corporate ladder, somehow in the midst of that, of me climbing the ladder, when I seem to not be willing, or in the past when I've seemed to not necessarily be willing to go up the corporate ladder, I didn't want to climb it the way they wanted me to climb, right? And in the midst of that, they would always find a way to draw a triangle. Like, they would be like, Mr. Wright, you're not falling in line. Don't forget the triangle. Don't forget how power works. And they always made some side reference to this triangle. Now, some conspiracy theorists will say Illuminati this, symbology, this, that, and the third, or whatever, but I mean, the fact remains, what you believe, what you want to believe. I'm not here to persuade you if you're already convinced on something else. But the reality is that I just don't think we could escape the physics of it. So if you are from that ilk where, the top percent at the top of the triangle, rule the people at the bottom of the triangle, well, for the triangle to work, you always need someone on the bottom. It's the only way it's going to work. So, of course, someone has always got to be at the bottom. So that's why the Black experience is sad in when we, or to me, when I am coming face to face with the nature of oppression, right? It is gleeful to me for the fact that we find a way to celebrate and overcome, right? But we are talking about normalizing Black death. So my hypothesis is that, of course, the forces at play here would absolutely love to keep us divided, and the only way to keep us divided is somebody's got to be on the bottom tier of that triangle. My thoughts. That's why it's no surprise that, I could cite, how long would this blog be if I cited all of the injustices just here? But bottom line, even as a rapper, right? Even on my come up in the 90s, trying to be a rapper and all of that good stuff, I found it as I was navigating my way through the hip hop sphere. I found it harder to secure a record deal talking about what I was talking about. I wasn't talking about guns. I wasn't talking about women. I wasn't talking about nightclubs. Well, I was talking about women a little bit, but I wasn't talking about gangster shit. I wasn't talking about killing anybody. I wasn't talking about how tough I was or whatever. I was just like, this is just what I see. Not necessarily a gangster. I know them, but I'm not one of them myself, so I could not pretend to be one. But I was being asked to be one. Now, why is that? Especially when you had groups, or you have groups, especially in the 90s, that were as popular as a Public Enemy, as a Tribe Called Quest. Let's take it to Outkast. Outkast proved you could sell a gazillion albums without talking that gangster shit. Yet for all, a million rappers are talking about how they are products of the crack era. And, Rick Ross and company, a lot of people were talking about drugs and the street life when they themselves might not have necessarily lived that life. So one can't really say record sales inspired it. Now, pause here. We got to take a little ownership here too, because if the people didn't necessarily buy it, if the people just refused to buy it, then they couldn't sell it, right? And I'm not judging at all, because who doesn't have Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style album? Who doesn't have Biggie Smalls' album, the first album, Ready to Die, and Life After Death? How many times have I bought that album? People who've been stealing my albums, y'all need to give them back. Let's make a prediction on the hypothesis. I predict that when we break down all of the stuff that I am saying, I really feel it just. I predict when you really break it down, it really comes down to the benevolence of man and what man is really capable of. Have faith not in man, right? The experiment part of this blog is basically all of the social experiments that have already been conducted, right? Let's go way back to when the Constitution of this country was being written. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, right? So a couple of the slaves apparently who could actually read, that were learning to read in secret, when they were starting this propaganda campaign and spreading out, the Revolutionary War, I suppose, is about to happen, and there's slaves that are picking up these pamphlets in the streets. They're spreading the message, saying that we the people here of the United States of America should be free from European rule, right? And apparently they gave out early copies of the Constitution. Well, the problem, the brothers started reading some of these pamphlets and they were confused. They was like, wait a second. All men are created equal? And all of a sudden it was stopped. It was just like, wait a second, we meant all men. We didn't mean you. We didn't mean you. And they were just like, well, I'm supposing the slaves were like, well, I'm a man. 10 fingers, 10 toes. I'm just different in skin color. What's the problem? Well, let's change the law. It's really 3/5 of a man. And then, how many examples? How many examples can I give? As far as is Black Death being normalized? Of course it is. And the only other social experiment that I will cite, because I'm not a scientist, I'm an artist, is, and I keep making reference to Rick Ross. And Rick Ross has been talking a lot of gangster talk for a long time. Before and after 50 Cent exposed this man, it was just like, this guy is a former corrections officer. He's no gangster. And nobody cared. At least it didn't affect his record sales very much, did it? And out of all the references he was making in these songs about flipping packs, killing folks if they step out of line, or let me pull a heater, and all of this good stuff. You could say all of this on popular radio. You can say all of this as long as blacks are killing blacks on wax. I'm showing my age. Excuse me, on the digital stream. As long as blacks are killing blacks on the record, over the radio, who cares? But that same artist, Officer Ricky Ross, was that a cheap shot? That was a little cheap shot. He's not a police officer anymore. And I actually like his music. I really got nothing against Rick. But when he said one line that was suggesting that he would kind of force himself on a female if she was inebriated and she couldn't really fight him off, or however the line went, the earth stopped. You had radio stations, you had people ready to protest, you had shows getting ready to pull the record, like, oh, we won't play this. It was this giant scandal. Now peep the game. Out of all of this black on black, out of all of the things Rick Ross is saying, as long as he's killing blacks, aka normalizing killing blacks, or whatever, or committing genocide. Even he's really not talking about toting guns like that, but he's definitely making plenty of drug references. And I get it. It's hyperbole. I know a lot of us don't necessarily take it seriously, and sure, you can say that that okay, crack cocaine is just a metaphor for music, and I'm selling my music. My music is like crack. I get people addicted to my music. Yeah. I'm a poet. I know all about the use of metaphor. But there's clever use of metaphor, and then there's not so clever use of metaphor. So when a people are trying to uplift themselves, are making references and glorifying a period in time where the black family was effectively dismantled. Do you guys remember the crack 80s? I was living in Far Rockaway during the crack 80s. Thank you, Ronald Reagan and the CIA, for all the drugs you put in the ghetto at night, only to say crack was whack by day. So, I don't think that's very cool. So, I think, so at the end of this particular blog, after analyzing the data, after seeing how people could see George Floyd getting a knee put to his neck by a police officer for 9 minutes plus, and you really had some people saying, well, I don't see where the crime is here against the police. I guess the murder of blacks is pretty normal if we could watch that, because if that would have been, I don't know, Tom Cruise, this would have been a little different, no? We have a woman vice president who is multiracial, right? We also have a president in Joe Biden who was not only vice president under the first black president, but he also said, and I'm paraphrasing, he also said something to the effect of, when he was going against the orange one, he said, if African Americans don't vote for me, then they're not black. He said this, or I'm paraphrasing, but essentially he said this. Yet for all, even though that the George Floyd's murderer was on trial under his administration, there was no legislation passed to say, cops, we're going to pass some laws that discourage you guys from doing this type of thing. Yet, when there was a wave of Asian hate crimes happening that same spring, I believe there was some legislation pushed through. Isn't that interesting? So, the observation, let's go back to the observation. Let's recap, shall we? The observation was, is the murder of blacks being normalized? And in closing, after looking at the social experiments of man, or the malevolence of man, whichever you take your pick, right? After analyzing all of this, I say unequivocally, yes, it is being normalized. Yes, the only way, and I go back to the triangle, right? And for all of you Illuminati nuts out there, I'm making the triangle for a point. I'm not passing Masonic symbols to my Illuminati brothers. And if I am a part of the 1%, please cut me a check, because the one, I could use some better lighting. Kidding. But yes, in closing, analyzing the data, or the things that I know, what my experience is, what I've seen, right? Of course this is happening. The only way to keep this triangle, to keep it standing, for the very few to be at the top, and then somebody always has to stay at the bottom. That's how it works. If you take the bottom away and you make everybody freaking equal, then the people at the top have a lot less, and they don't want that. Not at all. So I am, as I said in the beginning, when we're coming in, I am using a very loose I am using the scientific method as a very loose guide for artistic expression. I am putting an artistic spin on a scientific method, taking you through all of these guidelines and just expressing myself. It helps the thoughts of an artist that go all over the place. It helps me stay on message. I'll be back. I'll be dropping these a bit more often than not. And in closing, like I said in the beginning, you could either accept what I said, or you could reject it. It really makes me know, never mind which one you choose, because at the end of this, if you stuck around to see the end of this blog, the true goal is really not to get you to believe anything. It's really to get you to exercise that space between your ears. Critical thinking is a great thing. See you soon.